He thought the past had buried every unanswered question forever, until a single wedding invitation arrived and reminded him that silence sometimes carries the loudest truth. Adrian Castellano had received thousands of envelopes over the years, contracts worth millions of dollars, invitations to charity galas hosted by governors and celebrities, handwritten letters from old family friends who still remembered the frightened white-haired boy he used to be before the city began calling him the most respected businessman with the most intimidating reputation in Chicago. Every morning, his executive assistant arranged the mail into neat stacks across the polished walnut table outside his private office, and every morning Adrian skimmed through them with the same detached efficiency that had made his empire impossible to challenge. But this envelope was different. It wasn't embossed with gold lettering or decorated with expensive seals. It was simple, cream-colored, slightly textured, the kind someone chose because elegance didn't have to announce itself. There was no return address, only his full name written in graceful handwriting he hadn't seen in 7 years. Adrian stopped walking. The bustling office around him faded into silence as his fingers hovered over the familiar script. He recognized it instantly, though he wished he didn't. Naomi Carter, his former maid, the woman who had disappeared from his estate one rainy October morning without asking for her final paycheck, without leaving a note, without saying goodbye to anyone. For years he had convinced himself she simply found a better life somewhere else. That explanation had always been easier than admitting he never truly understood why her absence left an emptiness that no new employee ever managed to fill. Slowly, he opened the envelope. Inside rested a wedding invitation printed on thick ivory cardstock. His blue eyes settled on the first line, together with their families. Then they moved lower. Naomi Carter requests the honor of your presence. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Naomi was getting married. He should have felt nothing. 7 years had passed. People moved on. Lives changed. Yet an unfamiliar weight settled quietly across his chest. He almost slipped the invitation back into its envelope without reading another word. Almost. Then his eyes reached the bottom of the card. A single name appeared beneath the ceremony details. Not the groom's name. Not a parent. Not a sponsor. Just one signature printed in smaller letters beneath everything else. Adrian's fingers froze against the edge of the card. The color drained from his face. His heartbeat slowed instead of racing, as though his entire body refused to believe what his eyes had just read. That name should have been impossible. Only 2 people had ever known it. One of them was standing alone inside his office. The other had vanished 7 years earlier, carrying a secret Adrian had never realized existed. The room remained perfectly still. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. Cars flowing through downtown streets, as if the world had not changed in a single heartbeat. But inside that office, everything had. Adrian lowered himself into the leather chair without taking his eyes off the invitation. Memories he had locked away with ruthless discipline began slipping through the cracks one by one. The quiet footsteps in empty hallways before sunrise. Fresh coffee appearing exactly the way he liked it without ever asking. A gentle voice humming somewhere beyond the kitchen while the mansion still slept. The warmth of a home he had only noticed after it disappeared. 7 years ago, he believed Naomi Carter had walked away from his life forever. Now a single name printed at the bottom of a wedding invitation whispered something far more unsettling. Maybe she never left? 7 years earlier, long before a quiet envelope found its way back into Adrian Castellano's hands, Naomi Carter arrived at the estate carrying everything she owned inside one faded blue suitcase with a broken wheel that clicked against the stone driveway every few feet. She was 22 years old, newly arrived in Chicago after caring for her late grandmother through a long illness, and the housekeeping agency had warned her that the position came with unusual expectations. The owner valued privacy above conversation. Employees were expected to be invisible. Questions were discouraged. Curiosity was expensive. Naomi had simply smiled and thanked them for the opportunity because she had learned long ago that dignity did not require attention. It required consistency. The Castellano estate stood on the edge of Lake Michigan like something pulled from another century, its limestone walls glowing warm beneath the morning sun, while rows of perfectly trimmed hedges framed a long, winding driveway. Every window reflected quiet wealth rather than loud luxury. Inside, polished oak floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. Fireplaces stood tall enough to warm entire rooms, and every clock seemed to tick with deliberate precision. The house was magnificent, but it also felt strangely empty, as though every beautiful object had been carefully arranged to hide the loneliness that echoed through its halls. Sophia Bennett, the head housekeeper, greeted Naomi with the firm kindness of someone who had spent years protecting both the staff and the household. She explained the routines carefully, from preparing breakfast before sunrise to polishing the library every Thursday afternoon. Then she stopped walking outside a pair of heavy walnut doors on the second floor. "Mr. Castellano's office," she said softly. "Unless he asks for you directly, you never enter this room." Naomi nodded without hesitation. Rules had never frightened her. They gave life structure when everything else felt uncertain. During her first week, she rarely saw Adrian. She noticed traces of him instead. A half-finished cup of black coffee left beside legal papers. A neatly folded charcoal suit jacket resting over the back of a chair. Piano music drifting through the hallway late at night before disappearing as suddenly as it had begun. The employees spoke about him with careful respect, describing him as disciplined, reserved, and impossible to read. Yet none of those descriptions matched the quiet details Naomi discovered every day. Fresh flowers always appeared beside an old framed photograph in the library, although no gardener admitted placing them there. Children's books sat neatly organized inside a small reading room no one ever used. Every Sunday evening someone left birdseed on the terrace overlooking the lake, and every Monday morning sparrows gathered there before sunrise. Those tiny acts of routine did not belong to a cold man. They belonged to someone trying very hard to remember warmth. One rainy afternoon, Naomi found an elderly groundskeeper struggling to move several heavy flower pots before the storm strengthened. Without saying a word, she set down her cleaning supplies, rolled up her sleeves, and helped him carry every pot beneath the covered garden walkway. Their uniforms were damp by the time they finished, but the old man laughed with genuine gratitude. Neither of them realized Adrian had been watching quietly from the second-floor study window. He did not step outside. He did not offer praise. He simply observed the young woman who never looked around to see whether anyone noticed her kindness. For the first time in months, something inside the silent house shifted so gently that almost no one recognized it. Almost no one except the man standing alone behind the glass, wondering why a stranger seemed to make his home feel alive again. Weeks slowly turned into months, and without either of them noticing exactly when it happened, Naomi Carter became part of the quiet rhythm that held the Castellano estate together. She never tried to stand out. She simply paid attention. She noticed that Adrian preferred the curtains in his study half open during the morning because the first light from Lake Michigan reached the shelves without reflecting across his desk. She noticed he never touched dessert after business dinners, but always accepted fresh berries if they appeared beside his coffee the following morning. She noticed the long hours, the untouched lunches, and the way exhaustion settled behind his blue eyes even when the rest of the world admired his calm confidence. She never mentioned any of it. She simply adjusted small things that made difficult days a little easier. Adrian noticed those changes long before he admitted them to himself. His coffee always arrived exactly when another meeting ended. The fireplace in the library was already burning before cold autumn evenings settled over the city. The fountain pen he misplaced somehow reappeared on his desk every single time. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone else would celebrate. Yet every detail quietly reminded him that someone was paying attention without expecting recognition in return. It was a language he had almost forgotten existed. One Saturday afternoon, while reviewing financial reports in the sunroom overlooking the gardens, Adrian heard gentle laughter outside. Curious despite himself, he looked through the window. Naomi sat on the stone path beside Oliver, the 12-year-old son of the estate gardener, who visited his father every weekend after baseball practice. The boy struggled with a difficult math assignment spread across his backpack, his face filled with frustration. Naomi patiently drew simple shapes on the sidewalk with a piece of white chalk, turning fractions into slices of apple pie and baseball statistics. Within minutes, Oliver grinned, as though the impossible problem had become obvious. Adrian watched from inside without interrupting. He had spent years funding educational charities across Illinois, Yet a young housekeeper had just changed one child's entire afternoon using nothing more than patience and sidewalk chalk. Later that evening, he crossed paths with Oliver near the front gate. The boy waved enthusiastically before running toward his father. "Mr. Castellano," he shouted back with innocent excitement. "Miss Naomi says every hard problem becomes smaller when somebody believes you can solve it." Adrian stood motionless long after the child disappeared. Those words lingered with him in a way quarterly reports and public speeches never could. A few days later, another unexpected discovery found him. While searching for an old family document inside the library, he noticed one of his late mother's favorite books resting on a reading table instead of the shelf where it belonged. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a pressed white daisy carefully preserved between the pages, along with a handwritten bookmark. The handwriting was unmistakably Naomi's. It read, "Some homes become beautiful because of the people who live inside them. Others become beautiful because someone quietly chooses kindness every single day." Adrian stared at the sentence for several moments. There was no signature, no explanation. She had probably written it only to remember a thought that mattered to her. Still, something about those simple words unsettled him. For years, he had measured success through numbers, responsibilities, and accomplishments. Naomi seemed to measure life differently. She measured it through moments no one else considered important. Standing alone in the silent library, Adrian carefully returned the bookmark exactly where he had found it. He told himself it was only a thoughtful sentence written by a kind employee. Yet for the first time in many years, he found himself wondering whether the strongest people were not always the ones who carried the greatest authority, but the ones who quietly carried hope into places where no one expected to find it. The first snowfall arrived earlier than expected that year, covering the gardens in a quiet blanket of white that softened every path leading to the lake. Inside the estate, preparations for the annual Castellano Foundation Winter Gala filled every hallway with careful activity. Florists carried arrangements through the grand entrance, musicians rehearsed in the ballroom, and chefs transformed the kitchen into a symphony of warm bread, cinnamon, and fresh herbs. It was the one evening each year when the mansion opened its doors to business leaders, educators, and families supported by the foundation scholarships. Adrian personally reviewed every detail because the event had once been his mother's favorite tradition. Naomi worked alongside the rest of the staff from sunrise until late afternoon, making certain every room reflected the quiet elegance the evening deserved. Shortly before the first guests arrived, Sophia handed Naomi a small velvet box that had been discovered beneath a display cabinet while the ballroom was being prepared. It contained an antique silver brooch that had belonged to Adrian's mother, a piece everyone believed had been lost years earlier. Sophia smiled with relief. "Mr. Castellano has been looking for this since the house renovation. Please take it to his office before the reception begins." Naomi hesitated for only a moment before climbing the familiar staircase. It was the first time she had ever approached those walnut doors with permission. She knocked softly. Adrian looked up from a stack of speeches spread across his desk. For a second, both of them remained perfectly still, as though the room itself recognized that something unusually simple was about to happen. Naomi stepped inside and placed the velvet box on the polished surface. "I believe this belongs to your family, sir." Adrian opened the lid, and his composed expression changed almost instantly. He gently lifted the silver brooch into his hand, tracing the delicate engraving with his thumb. "My mother wore this every Christmas," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We searched everywhere after the renovation." "Thank you." Naomi smiled with the same quiet warmth she offered everyone. Sometimes important things are never truly lost. They are simply waiting for the right moment to be found. Adrian looked at her longer than either of them expected. There was no grand confession hiding behind that sentence, only a simple truth spoken with complete sincerity. Yet those words lingered in the room long after the conversation should have ended. As Naomi turned to leave, Adrian surprised even himself. "Miss Carter." She paused. "You have been here nearly a year, and I realize I have never properly thanked you for everything you do. Most people notice only the loud accomplishments. You seem to notice the quiet ones." Naomi lowered her eyes with gentle humility. "Quiet things are usually the ones that matter the most, sir. They build trust before anyone realizes it is happening." Adrian watched the office door close behind her, unable to explain why that brief conversation stayed with him through the entire evening. Hours later, while welcoming guests beneath sparkling chandeliers, his attention drifted across the ballroom until it found Naomi helping an elderly volunteer adjust her coat before guiding her toward a warm seat near the fireplace. No photographers noticed the moment. No newspapers would ever write about it. The volunteer simply reached for Naomi's hand with grateful eyes, and Naomi smiled as though kindness required no audience. Adrian stood among governors, executives, and distinguished guests, yet his thoughts remained fixed on the woman who never asked for recognition. He did not realize that this ordinary winter evening would become the last peaceful memory they would ever share before everything changed. Within only a few days, Naomi Carter would disappear from the Castellano estate without leaving behind a single explanation, and Adrian would spend the next 7 years believing he had been forgotten by the one person who had quietly remembered every part of him. Back in the present, Adrian remained seated in his office long after the city lights had begun reflecting across Lake Michigan. The invitation rested on his desk exactly where he had placed it, yet his attention kept returning to the small signature printed beneath the ceremony details. He reached for the card once more, reading every line with slower, more deliberate eyes. That was when he noticed something he had missed before. Beneath the elegant script was the name of the venue, St. Gabriel Community Chapel, followed by a brief line that read, "Reception to follow at the Hope Harbor Learning Center." Adrian frowned. Hope Harbor. The name stirred a memory he could not immediately place. He pressed the intercom on his desk. "Melissa, could you come in for a moment, please?" His executive assistant entered carrying a tablet. "You asked for me, sir." Adrian slid the invitation toward her. "Have we ever supported an organization called Hope Harbor Learning Center?" Melissa scanned the card before nodding. "Yes, sir. About 6 years ago, the Castellano Foundation quietly funded a scholarship program there. It helps young adults finish college while caring for family members." Adrian looked up. "Who approved the grant?" Melissa searched through the digital archive for several seconds before turning the screen toward him. "According to the records, you did. Personally." Adrian stared at the approval form. He recognized his signature immediately, but something else captured his attention. Attached to the request was a handwritten recommendation. The signature at the bottom read Sophia Bennett, his former head housekeeper. Without hesitation, Adrian picked up his phone. Sophia had retired 3 years earlier to a small lakeside town in Wisconsin, but she answered on the second ring with the same calm voice he remembered. "Mr. Castellano, it has been far too long." Adrian smiled faintly before getting straight to the question that had been growing heavier by the minute. "Sophia, do you remember Hope Harbor Learning Center?" There was a brief silence. "Of course I do. Naomi volunteered there every Saturday." Adrian sat forward. "Volunteered?" Sophia sounded genuinely surprised. "She never told you?" Adrian slowly shook his head, although she could not see him. "She never mentioned it." Sophia sighed softly. Naomi believed kindness lost its meaning the moment it became a performance. She tutored students preparing for nursing school entrance exams. She organized food drives. She even used part of her salary to buy textbooks for young mothers trying to finish college. She insisted no one mention her name when donations were made. Adrian felt his chest tighten. He had spent nearly a year under the same roof as Naomi, believing he understood the quiet woman who worked in his home, yet he had known almost nothing about the life she lived beyond those walls. Then another question escaped before he could stop it. "Sophia, why did she leave?" This time the silence lasted much longer. When Sophia finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone reopening an old memory. "I promised her I would never interfere unless the day came when you asked that question yourself." Adrian closed his eyes. "I am asking now." Sophia inhaled slowly. Naomi did not leave because she stopped caring about this house. She left because she believed staying would eventually hurt someone she respected too much. Adrian opened his eyes immediately. "Hurt who?" Sophia answered with heartbreaking certainty. "You." And before Adrian could ask another question, Sophia quietly added something that made the impossible name on the invitation feel even more mysterious. "There is a wooden keepsake box in the attic storage room above the east wing. Naomi asked me to leave it there until the day you were finally ready to stop looking for answers in the wrong places." Adrian did not wait until morning. For the first time in years, deadlines, meetings, and carefully planned schedules no longer mattered. He climbed the narrow staircase leading to the attic above the east wing, a place that had remained untouched since the estate's renovation years earlier. Dust floated through thin beams of moonlight filtering beneath the wooden rafters, and old furniture stood beneath white linen covers like silent witnesses guarding forgotten memories. After several minutes of searching, he noticed a small cedar box resting on the highest shelf beside a collection of holiday decorations. It was simple, polished by age rather than luxury, and tied with a faded blue ribbon he immediately recognized. Naomi had once used identical ribbons to decorate handmade gift baskets for the Foundation's holiday food drive. His hand slowed as he untied the bow. Inside lay a neatly folded letter, a small brass key, a pressed white daisy, and an old photograph. Adrian picked up the photograph first. It had been taken during the Foundation's winter gala 7 years earlier. Guests filled the ballroom beneath sparkling lights, smiling toward the camera. He barely noticed himself standing near the center. Instead, his attention settled on Naomi in the background. She was helping an elderly volunteer adjust her scarf while quietly laughing at something the woman had said. No one else seemed to notice her. Yet somehow she had become the brightest part of the entire photograph. He turned the picture over. Written carefully across the back were only a few words. The people who change our lives are rarely standing where everyone else is looking. Adrian closed his eyes for a long moment before unfolding the letter. Naomi's handwriting was as graceful and steady as he remembered. Dear Mr. Castellano, if you are reading this, then enough time has finally passed for the truth to do more good than harm. First, please forgive me for leaving without saying goodbye. I know disappearing probably looked like betrayal, but silence was the only gift I believed I could still give you. There are moments when explaining everything only creates more pain. I prayed this would not be one of those moments forever. Adrian continued reading, every line drawing him deeper into a past he had never truly understood. Naomi wrote about the months she spent volunteering at Hope Harbor Learning Center after work, helping students who believed their circumstances had already decided their future. She described how watching them fight for hope reminded her that every life deserved another chance, no matter how impossible that chance appeared. Then came the sentence that stopped Adrian completely. 7 years ago, I accidentally overheard a conversation that was never meant for me. It was not dangerous. It was simply deeply personal. I learned that you had quietly arranged a full scholarship for a young medical student whose family had lost everything after a house fire. You refused to let anyone know the donation came from you because you believed gratitude should never become a debt. I realized then that the world saw one version of you while your heart protected another. Adrian searched his memory until the scholarship suddenly returned to him. He had almost forgotten it because he had never expected to hear about it again. Naomi continued. That student was my younger sister, Ava Carter. She never knew who changed her life. Neither did I until that afternoon. From that moment forward, every time I thanked you, every time I smiled, every kindness I offered inside your home carried a gratitude I could never honestly explain without revealing a secret you never intended anyone to discover. Adrian lowered the letter into his lap. His breathing had grown slow and uneven. The impossible name printed beneath the wedding invitation had finally begun to make sense, but he knew with absolute certainty that Naomi's story was still holding back the most important truth of all. Adrian returned to the letter with unsteady hands, sensing that every sentence was leading him toward the answer he had searched for without realizing it. Naomi's careful handwriting continued across the second page. After I learned about Ava's scholarship, I wanted to thank you. Not because you expected gratitude, but because kindness like yours deserved to be remembered. Every time I almost spoke, I saw how carefully you protected your privacy. I understood that revealing what I knew would also reveal that I had overheard something deeply personal. I could never repay generosity by taking away your trust, so I chose silence instead. Adrian remembered dozens of quiet mornings when Naomi had seemed as though she wanted to say something before simply offering a gentle smile and returning to work. At the time, he had dismissed those moments without another thought. Now each memory returned with heartbreaking clarity. He kept reading. Then everything changed. One evening I accidentally heard another conversation. This one was about you. Several respected business leaders planned to honor your anonymous scholarship program during the Foundation Gala. They wanted to announce publicly that you were the secret donor behind dozens of educational grants. They believed they were celebrating your generosity. They did not understand that you had spent years protecting those students from feeling indebted to one powerful man. They also did not know that your family's privacy depended on remaining outside unnecessary attention. Adrian leaned back slowly. He remembered that meeting. He had quietly declined the recognition afterward, but only because someone had informed the organizers at the last minute that the announcement would embarrass him. He had never discovered who had intervened. Naomi's next words answered the mystery that had lived unnoticed for 7 years. I asked Sophia to help me stop the announcement before the event began. She trusted my judgment without asking for details. The organizers agreed to remove your name only after someone accepted responsibility for the confusion. I told them the mistake came from me. Afterward, rumors spread through the staff that I had interfered with foundation business. I never corrected them because explaining the truth would have exposed your private work. When the questions became too difficult, I realized the kindest thing I could do was leave before anyone asked for more answers. Adrian lowered the pages into his lap, unable to move. For 7 years, he had believed Naomi had abandoned the estate without explanation. In reality, she had quietly accepted misunderstanding to protect something he valued more than public praise. He continued reading through blurred vision. Please do not feel guilty if you never searched for me. You gave my sister an education, and through her you gave our family a future. That gift was already greater than I could ever repay. Leaving your home was never a punishment. It was my final thank you. I wanted you to continue changing lives exactly the way you always had, without carrying the burden of mine. If we ever meet again, I hope it will be as two people who finally understand that the greatest acts of kindness are often the ones no one else ever sees. Adrian carefully folded the letter exactly along its original creases. The impossible name beneath the invitation no longer represented a mystery. It represented Ava Carter, the sister whose future he had quietly changed years earlier without ever knowing, whose life his compassion had truly reached. Yet one question still remained unanswered. If Naomi had finally found happiness, why had she chosen to send the invitation directly to him after 7 years of complete silence? The morning of the wedding arrived beneath a clear autumn sky, the kind that painted Lake Michigan in shades of silver and blue. Adrian left the estate alone, carrying nothing except the cream-colored invitation and the carefully folded letter that had rested inside his jacket pocket since the night before. The drive to Hope Harbor Learning Center took less than 40 minutes, yet every mile seemed to bridge 7 years of unanswered questions. When he arrived, he found no grand ballroom or extravagant decorations waiting beyond the chapel doors. Instead, volunteers arranged simple white flowers gathered from local gardens. Children from the learning center carefully placed handwritten welcome signs along the walkway. Elderly neighbors carried homemade pies into the reception hall, while college students laughed together as they adjusted rows of wooden chairs. It was not a celebration built with wealth. It was one built with gratitude. Adrian stepped quietly inside the chapel and chose the last pew, hoping to remain unnoticed. Before the ceremony began, he wandered into the reception hall where framed photographs lined one wall. Curiosity drew him closer. The first photographs showed Hope Harbor's earliest graduating classes. The next displayed scholarship recipients proudly holding nursing diplomas, teaching certificates, engineering degrees, and social work licenses. Then Adrian stopped walking. One photograph showed Ava Carter wearing a white medical coat, smiling beside several young patients at a community health clinic. Beneath the frame was a small brass plaque. The Ava Carter Family Health Program, established to provide free medical care for families who believe education can change generations. Adrian felt another quiet weight settle inside his heart. His anonymous scholarship had not simply transformed one student's future. It had become the beginning of something much larger. As he continued down the wall, another display caught his attention. It featured dozens of handwritten notes from former students describing the person who had encouraged them when they wanted to give up. Every message ended with the same words. "Thank you, Miss Naomi. She believed in me before I believed in myself." A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "She never stopped helping people." Adrian turned slowly. Sophia Bennett stood beside him, dressed in a simple navy blue suit with a warm smile that carried the same steady kindness he remembered. "I wondered if you would come," she said gently. Adrian looked back toward the photographs. "She built all of this." Sophia nodded. "Not alone. She always said hope grows faster when people decide to share it. Adrian hesitated before asking the question that still remained. Why did she send me the invitation after all these years? Sophia smiled knowingly and reached into her handbag, removing a small cream envelope with Adrian's name written across the front in Naomi's familiar handwriting. She asked me to give you this only if you came. Adrian opened it carefully. Inside rested a single handwritten card. Dear Adrian, if you are reading this, then you chose to come not because of curiosity, but because understanding finally mattered more than old misunderstandings. That is the man I always believed you were. Today is not an ending. It is simply the beginning of another family built through kindness. Before I take my next step, there is one person I hoped would finally know the truth. You never changed only my life. You changed every life that my family has been able to touch because you quietly believed education could become compassion passed from one generation to the next. That is why your name belongs here today, even if no one else realizes it. Adrian lowered the note with trembling hands just as the chapel doors slowly opened and the first notes of gentle piano music floated through the quiet room. Naomi entered the chapel on her father's arm with the same quiet grace Adrian remembered from 7 years before. Her simple ivory gown carried no extravagant embroidery, only clean lines and timeless elegance, and the smile on her face held something even more beautiful than happiness. It held peace. As she walked slowly toward the front of the chapel, she glanced across the gathered guests. For a brief moment her eyes found Adrian standing quietly near the back. She stopped for the smallest fraction of a second, surprised but never frightened, before offering him the same gentle smile that had once welcomed exhausted gardeners, nervous children, lonely volunteers, and everyone else who had crossed her path. It was the smile of someone who carried no resentment. The ceremony continued beneath warm afternoon sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. The pastor spoke about marriage as a partnership built on daily acts of kindness rather than grand promises. Adrian listened more carefully than he expected. Every sentence seemed to describe the woman he had once believed he understood. When the ceremony concluded, applause filled the chapel, and guests slowly made their way toward the reception hall. Adrian considered leaving quietly. He had already found the answers he came searching for. Before he reached the exit, he heard a familiar voice behind him. Mr. Castellano. He turned to see Naomi standing only a few feet away, her bouquet resting gently in one hand. Up close, 7 years seemed to disappear. Time had changed them both, yet her eyes still carried the same calm warmth that had once made an enormous house feel like a home. Thank you for coming, she said softly. Adrian looked at her for a long moment before answering. I should be the one thanking you. There was so much I never understood. Naomi smiled gently. Sometimes understanding arrives exactly when it is supposed to. Adrian reached into his jacket and carefully removed the pressed white daisy he had found inside the cedar box. I believe this belongs to you. Naomi accepted the flower with quiet surprise before shaking her head. No, it belongs to both of us now. It reminds us that small things can survive much longer than anyone expects. Adrian nodded, then handed her the folded letter. I almost wish I had read this 7 years ago. Naomi looked toward the reception hall where her husband greeted guests with grateful laughter. Then she turned back to Adrian. If you had, I do not think either of us would have become the people we needed to be. Some journeys only make sense after we finish walking them. Adrian smiled, perhaps more sincerely than he had in many years. I never told you this, he admitted, but after you left, the house never felt quite the same. Naomi's eyes softened. Houses are only walls, Adrian. People are what make them feel like home. Before either of them could say another word, Ava Carter approached wearing the white coat embroidered with the Hope Harbor Family Health Program logo. She embraced her sister before extending her hand toward Adrian. I have wanted to meet you for years, she said. You changed my future before you even knew my name. Adrian shook her hand quietly. No, he replied. Your family changed mine. Later that afternoon, before leaving, Adrian met with the Hope Harbor Board of Directors and quietly established a permanent education endowment in honor of Naomi Carter, ensuring that every future scholarship would carry only one simple inscription beneath the recipient's name. One act of kindness always becomes another. As the sun settled behind Lake Michigan, Adrian drove home with the windows open, carrying no regret for what could never be changed. Instead, He carried gratitude for finally understanding the truth hidden inside one ordinary wedding invitation. Sometimes the greatest love story is not about two people ending up together. Sometimes it is about discovering that genuine kindness continues changing lives long after the people who first shared it have walked different paths. And on that quiet autumn evening, Adrian Castellano finally understood that the most unforgettable names are not remembered because they demanded attention, but because they quietly taught the world what dignity, gratitude, and grace truly look like.